Well, good afternoon. It is Friday afternoon, and I'm having my coffee. And I've already had coffee today several times. Well, not several times. I had coffee this morning early for breakfast. And then now it's after lunch. This is my second time. So once I'm finished with this, I will have had coffee several times. I don't want to get the wrong idea out there. I did refill my cup this morning, so maybe that's what I was thinking. I had several times of coffee. So we are here. It is fall. It is almost the election time. And as a result, we have this question: politics, temperance, and the gospel. And I know that for some people this year, as we've been coming up on the election, is the first time you've been thinking, should I vote? Should I not vote? And you had to go through that process. And what I want to talk about is the part of you that made that decision. Whether you ended up saying, I am not actually going to vote this time, or whether you said, you know what, I am voting this time. I remember back about 20 years ago when George W. was being elected for the first time, and I was old enough to vote. And so that election, that was one of my first elections to vote in, was when I voted for George W. Bush. Now, I lived in Texas at the time. He had been our governor at the time, and it was all new. But there's something that I remember from that election. There were people on the radio and on television and we didn't have the social media the same way we have it now, but we had people saying, now more than ever before, we've got to stand for truth. Now more than ever before, we've got to vote. Now more than ever before. And so this phrase, I heard it then, and I remember the thrill of hearing that and being like, wow, I am here for such a time as this. And so here's what's happened in the intervening years. Every time the election year comes around, I hear the same rhetoric. I hear people say the same thing over and over, that this election is the most important election of our lifetime. And at some point, the cynic in me says, okay, so now more than ever before, and this election is the most important election of my lifetime. And so does this just keep happening? Like, is every election going to be the most important election of my lifetime? Is it always going to be now more than ever before? What am I supposed to do with this information? Because the level of intensity and the level of, like, I've got to do this gets pretty intense. Now, I will say this. There's a lot of reasons why people vote for different people. And back in 2000, when I was voting for President George W. Bush, there were a few things I thought personally that when he spoke and talked, that he had mannerisms a lot like my grandfather. Now, there are some of you out there who know my grandfather. You might disagree with me. And it's fine. You can disagree with me. But there were things about George W. that I liked him as a person. Now, it's been funny because since he is no longer active president and is now back on his ranch in Texas, I hear that he's doing things like he took up painting, and for me personally, I'm like, oh boy, I could sure do that. I love the idea of taking up paint. I mean, I actually have been painting. I have back here in this corner over here a few art supplies, and then I have some more in the other room over there, and I have some easels out there, and I'm just waiting. And every year I think, well, maybe come Christmas time, I'll be able to do some painting, and I'm looking forward to it. So if things continue as they are and I don't get any way to paint now, then I think I might have to run for president just so that I could retire and go to my ranch somewhere and start painting. That is not, by the way, my life goal or my plan, but I'm just saying I would like to take up painting. So this is all a little beside the point of what I actually want to talk about, because when we vote in an election, back in 2000 when I was voting, that time I got emails from people saying, Joseph, you have abandoned the kingdom of heaven and you've embraced the kingdom of this world, that you are now approving of sin and sinners and sinfulness, that you have left behind the safety of the church. I had various responses to my announcement because I was 20. I didn't just quietly go and vote. I blasted it out there on my email newsletter and other things that get involved in politics now more than ever. Get in there. It's time. And I was excited. I got involved with our local Republican Party there in Texas. I got to see a lot of how the local grassroots movements work. I got to be involved with a lot of that, and I loved it. I had a really good time. I met some really neat people. What I loved about that time, in retrospect, is that when I was coming on the scene, Texas was actually still in transition, and every state is a little different. But in Texas, when you'd have a local polling place, say on election day, you would have a Republican and a Democrat both there as election judges. And then you would have one of these that would be like the presiding, the leading judge of that precinct. And the others that would be there, the other ones who would be on election day, would all be helping. But the idea was that if we were moving a ballot box, if we were doing anything that had to do with any of it, that we had to have someone from the other party present. And so I remember back in, it might have been the following election, because I started working with the elections pretty soon, as soon as I started voting. And I just remember one of the ladies says, "Hey, Joseph, can you go get the ballots from that ballot box?" Or whatever it was that we were doing. It was something we were doing. And I look around and I said, "Can I have a Democrat over here?" And it was a gentleman that was working the same election. He said, "Here I am." And so we went over there. We sat in the same precinct room all day long. We chatted all day long about things in the community, things going on. We had a good time. Republicans, Democrats working together to have an election. And I remember that flavor of this is our community and we all care about America more than we care about individual things. And so while we were passionate, and you could tell at the end of the day, like when we were all back at the courthouse watching the little sign, the poster boards being updated about who had won, you could tell, if your candidate won, you got pretty jubilant, and if your candidate lost, you'd start getting a little begrudging. Okay, congratulations, whatever. But it was good. That was my introduction into politics. It was friendly. It was helpful. And in fact, just when George Bush had won the governorship of Texas, it had switched to where, because what would usually happen is in our whoever was if our governor was Republican or Democrat would determine whether our election judge, the presiding judge, whatever of the election precinct, would be determined. His party would be determined by the whoever was elected. So there was a lady that had done it for years and years and years in our little town of Moulton, and suddenly Governor George W. Bush was elected, and he was not a Democrat, and so turns out that they had always had some trouble getting enough Republicans to be there to work the polling locations, and now they had to find Republicans to lead each of their polling places. And so it was pretty neat to see some of the older Democrats taking Republicans under their wing to say, here's how you run a polling location, here's how we make sure that everybody is properly registered and properly identified and has their proper ID, and here's how we do the votes. And so that was a I'm sure there were some very tense moments. I just didn't see them. I'm sure there were some polling locations where they just didn't get along and they didn't have good conversation, but I didn't see those. I got to work several different precincts during my time in Texas, and I really enjoyed that time. And and down in Lavaca County, I really enjoyed the getting to know the other people in the process, and it was a good introduction to me. So I enjoyed my politics at the time, and what was happening for me back in 2000 was, yes, I was a believer, yes, I was a Christian, and yes, I was concerned about what was going on in the vote and what was happening, and I wanted to be involved. It was my country. And so what I was beginning to see then, and what I still believe now, is that when Jesus says that we are the salt of the earth, salt interacts with wherever it is. And the problem that we have is sometimes we think oh, but if I vote for an earthly kingdom, I'm somehow badly misrepresenting my heavenly kingdom. And even here on earth, you can be a dual citizenship, and you make certain choices, and you have certain freedoms, you have certain privileges based on your citizenship. Well, I am a kingdom of heaven citizen, and I am here on earth, but I was also born here, and in America especially, I don't know in all countries, so I don't want to speak for every country that's out there. Well, let me speak for every country that's out there. Wherever you're born, if you're a born again believer and you live in your country, it is your responsibility to pray for your leaders. It is your responsibility to reach out with the gospel to everyone to help bring peace to your people. That's your responsibility as a citizen. You need to pray for your leaders. You need to help people come to peace with God, because if people are at peace with God, they can then make peace with each other. But if we don't have peace with God, it's very hard to make true peace with each other. So everyone around the world, if you're a believer and you believe in Jesus Christ, you should be praying for those who are in authority. You should be praying for your government. Now, in America, this is the part that really convicted me, was in the Bible, we're told that to whom much is given, much is required. And we're also told that someone who is in a position of leadership, or as a more is required of them if they're in that position. And I started looking around us, and our government was set up as a democratic republic, and so we had a voting that was happening to elect people to help enforce the actual rules and laws of the republic. And the republic was actually recognizing the rules of God and was trying to recognize those rules more than dictate our own morality. That was the way we were set up. It was supposed to be that our form of government recognizes that there's already other forms out there, other realities out there that are bigger than the United States. For instance, the fact that God created the world was a bigger truth to the founding fathers than whatever it was that they wanted. And so they had to go with the creator of the universe. So you'll notice the creator God mentioned that there are multiple times in the founding documents, and in those times they took it for granted that there was a creator that had made the world, and that certain laws were in place. The laws of nature, of nature's God, was one of the references in the Declaration of Independence. And so they assumed that there was a God and that we were responsible to him. Then they set up the republic trying to honor him. Did they get it all right? No, not quite. Did they make some mistakes? Oh, yes. Were there humans involved? Was there selfishness and greed at different times? Oh, you betcha. But they were trying to recognize that there was a God in heaven who actually cared about how people interacted with each other on earth. So at 20 years old, I recognized that there was a God in heaven, that he had made things, and I recognized that I lived in a country that had given me the opportunity and had given me the gift of being able to vote for people to help defend that republic. And it seemed to me at the time that if I was going to be the salt of the earth and the city on a hill, that my light should shine into all the areas around me, the light that was Christ in me, that the salt that was in me should be impacting all the things around me and not just some. And so that was when I got involved in politics. It was one area that I felt responsible for. Now, I also was very responsible for how I lived in my community. I felt very responsible. In fact, at that time, my family and we had adopted a 2-mile stretch of road, and we were picking up litter. We adopted a highway in Texas, and just our family and sometimes our friends, 4 times a year, we would go out there and pick up all the empty beer bottles and the trash and all the things that irresponsible people had just thrown out of their car windows as they went by. And we were trying to take care of the things that were given to us, because we're called to be good stewards of creation, good stewards of the things God gives us. So we're trying to be a good steward. Well, God has also given me a citizenship in America. And in the United States of America, that citizenship comes with certain rights and responsibilities. Now, there will be people that will insist that if you are a Christian, you can only vote for one person. I don't know what your ballot looks like this year, but we again have a whole list of people running for president. We also have a whole lot of other issues on the ballot, down ballot issues. A lot of times, issues that are farther down the ballot are very, very important to our community and how Christianity is being lived out on a local level, and we need to be paying attention to those, not just the federal level elections. And so I believe that as a believer who has been gifted this opportunity of being a citizen of the United States of America, I have certain responsibilities. One, I am praying for my leadership. And this is something, I've shared some of this before, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but I just want to mention this. When George Bush, when George W. Bush, the second George Bush, was elected, I had gotten some emails in the months leading up to it from a grassroots organization, and they were encouraging us to pray and to do different things. And so when he was elected, people said we should fast and pray for the president. And so we did. They set up a network somehow through that. And I remember signing up. I would take my turn. I would fast for a day. I'd pray for the president. And we did this. And I'm not exactly sure what happened, but somewhere along the way, that organization morphed a little bit. And by the time that President Obama was elected, they weren't fasting and praying for the president anymore. They were tearing him down every chance they could get and trying to say, stop the president, we've got to stop this, and now more than ever, that catchphrase that is bugging me, that was happening. So at the time, and now, so I have this situation going on where I'm still voting, I'm still part of what's happening in my country, but I am a little bit cautious. In fact, sometimes I think I'm cynical, and I don't want to be cynical, because when you're cynical, you think you're seeing through everything. And there's that awesome quote by C.S. Lewis that if you see through everything, that eventually you're going to live in a transparent world where nothing has meaning. And so I don't want to be cynical. I don't want to be seeing through everything. I don't want to live in a transparent world where nothing has meaning. But I am cautious, and I'm careful. And so when I'm seeing the same words being used over and over again from one year to the next, from one election to the next, I'm a little cautious. So here is, now looking back, the approach that I am taking as a Christian to voting. I think you should vote, but let me put it in context. Back in the 1850s, and I just showed a minute, this week, November 1st, we are releasing our movie. Let me see if I can find it here. Here we go. We Three Kings is being released November 1st. The DVD, actually, you can pre-order it over on our web store right now. If you go to thorncrownproject.com, you can actually find, you can pre-order We Three Kings, and as soon as it gets in, we'll ship it out to you. So it's there, it's available. We Three Kings, it has the Uncle Henry, the man here in the picture. Uncle Henry is John Henry Hopkins Jr. Well, John Henry Hopkins Sr., I have a picture of him here as well, somewhere. Here we go. John Henry Hopkins Sr., he was the Bishop of Vermont. And so in our story, we have him. In the movie, we represent him, but we learned a lot about John Henry Hopkins. And several things that I learned about him. For instance, doing the research, I have here a book that he wrote. It's called The American Citizen. It's by Bishop John Henry Hopkins. And in this book, he was talking about it says, the American citizen, his rights and duties according to the spirit of the Constitution of the United States. So he's writing a book specifically to American citizens, and he's saying this is what you ought to be like. So he goes through here. He talks about all kinds of things, issues. He did publish this book in 1857. When I was doing research for the movie, I found a bunch of interesting things about him. See, 1857 was right before the Civil War. Well, he continued on, and if you remember, the evangelist D.L. Moody was starting around right before the Civil War and then carried on for the next 50 years. About the same time that D.L. Moody was up and doing his ministry, the Temperance Movement in America had really gained a lot of steam. And for the Temperance Movement, it was a movement to stop alcohol. It was supposed to be in the beginning it was sounding the alarm on what alcohol is doing to people, but eventually it became a point where you had to be a teetotaler and not touch alcohol at all. And so alcohol and the word temperance, which just means self-control, but it was applied to alcohol. They took the word temperance for self-control, applied it to alcohol, and then made it be abolition of alcohol. That's what they were after, to have absolutely no alcohol usage. So this is what was happening. And in Burlington, Vermont, in one of those years, I believe it was shortly after the war, there was a group that was coming through to all these towns, and they were getting together, as many pastors and ministers as they could together, and they were having temperance meetings. And so in their temperance meetings, and I was going to find one, I don't have it, but they had, at the time, they would have a pledge. They would create a little pledge that people would sign and say, I am not ever going to drink alcohol again. And so you could go to a meeting, you could get one of these booklets, and then you could go home and you could go to all your neighbors and talk to them about temperance and get them to sign off that they would never drink alcohol again. And then you'd come back to the meeting the next night and say, wow, I talked to 3 people and they all agreed and they signed the pledges here, and everyone, woohoo, and they would rejoice. Now this is where it got to eventually. Somewhere along the line, it started out with people having like revival meetings and tent meetings. And so I'm piecing together a bunch of history here, and some of you might have other bits of history about the temperance movement. I'm not giving you a complete whole picture. I'm just giving you parts of it, and hopefully you'll then be able to follow with the point I'm going to make. So one of these meetings was coming to Burlington, Vermont, where Bishop John Henry Hopkins, the Bishop of Vermont, the Diocese of Vermont, there he was. He was an Episcopalian minister, a bishop, and they asked him to come and speak. They wanted him to come and speak at their event. And so what does he do? Does he say, oh, wow, they want me to come? No, actually, no. He says, I will not come and speak. And they were a little affronted and somewhat offended. And they said, why not? And he said, we preach the gospel every Sunday here in this church. And we teach our children about the fruits of the Spirit and the gospel and being free from bondage. Now, I'm putting some words in his mouth because his son actually wrote another book, not this one, but his son wrote another book about Bishop Hopkins, and that book is out of print, but one of his descendants actually sent us a PDF copy of it, so I was able to read what his son wrote about him. And so he basically said, no, we already preach the gospel. We already tell people that if they're in bondage or if they're in brokenness or if they're in addiction, they can come to Christ for freedom. But I'm not going to come preach at your temperance thing. Now, I'm willing to say, because he did work together at other times, that had they been having a different sort of, maybe a convention on the gospel, and had they asked him to come and preach the gospel, he might have come. But his point was, I'm a believer, and I represent God in his church, and I preach the gospel. And you're wanting me to lay aside the gospel and pick up the temperance banner. And in his mind, and again, he wrote a lot. I've read a lot of what he said and what his son said about him, but it's still my words, okay? So I could be misrepresenting him a little bit. But he said, in his mind, he was saying, I am first and foremost a believer of the gospel. It is the number one thing that I do and believe in. And in my gospel, if I am in bondage to something, my Christ can rescue me from that. And then his Spirit dwells within me. And then as a result of his Spirit being within me, I can practice temperance / self-control. So why would I skip the empowerment of the Holy Spirit and the freedom of Christ to just go and talk about the need for temperance? And in reality, it was a political thing. The years that followed, I believe, proved Bishop Henry Hopkins correct in this. It was better for the church to focus on the gospel and rescuing people from all kinds of addictions. Because if you signed up a pledge for a temperance in the heat of the moment, you could also break your pledge for temperance. And later on, there was the Temperance Movement, when they, the actual legislation, when they actually brought temperance into the United States, and for a while abolished, and you weren't supposed to make liquor and alcohol. That was a huge push. And I know several other historical figures that were very involved in that, but it didn't quite work. And here's why it didn't work. See, truth is not my truth or your truth. Truth is truth. And one of the truths that was put here in Christianity that is still a truth, if you look in Scripture, that you can back up and you can stand on, you can say you should not be excessively alcoholic and you should not be drunk. But if you want to use the Scripture to say you should never, ever, ever drink again, you have to say, well, there was the sons of Rechab. They didn't drink because their father told them not to. So then you have to say, okay, well, are you a son of Rechab, and are you allowed to drink, or did your father tell you not to? What is this situation here? And the heart of it is, well, the Holy Spirit in me brings self-control, and I will not be addicted to alcohol. I will not be addicted to social media. I will not be addicted to pornography. I will not be addicted in any way to anything, because I will be free. But I don't have to bring any of those up as an issue necessarily. I have to first bring forth the gospel. So I'm getting a little sidetracked, and I'm getting close to running out of time. This character here, what he was doing, and this is what happened to him. Then Bishop Henry Hopkins. People wrote letters to the editors of magazines in Vermont. There were editorials written, and they kept talking about this drunken bishop who wouldn't. And his own son said, "My father never drank in his life. He was more of a teetotaler than most of those teetotalers. He, on occasion, would be somewhere where someone who was hosting him would bring him a cup of wine or something that he couldn't just say no to, and so he might take a small sip and set it aside, or he might just set it aside. But until the day that he died, he was not an alcoholic. He did not drink alcohol on a regular basis. He practiced the very thing that they wanted him to preach, but he did it within the context of the gospel." You and me right now, 150 years later, we're dealing with a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff on the line. If you look at the platforms of the two, the Democrat and the Republican right now, if you look at the platforms of there's several others that are out there, the Constitution Party, Libertarian Party, some of those other platforms. You look at all these platforms. The platform is what we're voting for. There's usually a person at the head of that platform, that the president and the vice presidential candidate, they're representing this platform. 4 years ago when Trump was elected, I did not expect him to do the things that he did in these 4 years. I didn't think that he would do all of those. Now, at the time, and this is just for full disclosure, I live in a state where it is so democratic that, and there isn't much room for anything else, that I felt that by voting Republican, I'm helping change the color of the state. Now, we're still purple. We've been purple for a while, and so I'm just making it more purple, right? Hopefully deeper shades of purple that slowly turn to red or whatever the color. I don't even know. It would be lighter shades of purple. That's what I'm looking for. So when I look at the platform for, say, the Democratic Party, I am horrified. I'm not okay with the things I see there. When I look at the platform for the Republican Party, can I just be honest? I'm cynical. I'm like, oh, sure you believe this. Sure you're going to do this. You really? And one of the big issues I have is when people want to do things, I get so concerned because every government seems to just make more debt. And I'm like, get rid of debt. I want Dave Ramsey to run to get rid of debt. But not really. He's doing a really good ministry where he is, and he needs to keep doing what he's doing and not shift gears, okay? But the point that I'm trying to make is that God can call me, he can call you to be involved in politics. He can call either one of us, but there's something that happens that is not helpful. If I become super excited and I'm moving forward trying to affect one thing or one issue, or I'm really promoting a candidate, but I'm not doing it in the context of the gospel, that's not going to work well, because the bishop was correct. if I'm already preaching the gospel and the gospel is already pointing me to Christ, I already have a path for freedom, and and Christ himself is providing the power of the Holy Spirit to me so that I can actually walk free from my addictions. Why would I want to circumvent all of that to go to a political side of things and try to establish something in my own sheer by charisma and force and by convincing you and winning a debate? Why would I want to do that? I don't want to do that. I want to stand for the gospel of Jesus. I want to preach the gospel first. I want to seek first the kingdom of heaven. And I am fully aware that if I am active in the kingdom of heaven, then I care about poor people and what happens to them. I care about the unborn and what happens to them. I care about those who are being misrepresented and those who are being oppressed, and those I care about all of those because I care for Jesus Christ. I even care about the trees and the woods and the birds and everything that's out there because I care in the gospel. I care about the gospel. And so this is important for us as believers. If we start holding up a person and thinking this person is going to rescue us, we're wrong. A person, Trump, cannot save us. There's nobody out there with enough wisdom and experience and understanding to actually save us from all things. Jesus Christ can. And as we pursue Christ, and as the church around America pursues Christ, we might vote for Trump, we might vote for Tom Huffling, we might vote for Joe Jorgensen. There's a lot of people we can vote for. A couple of years ago, we had somebody running on the Clean Food political party here in Colorado. I still don't know what that means. I do like to eat clean food, I guess, so maybe that was a good political party. Anyway, I'm running out of time, and I want to close this now. But this is what I wanted to say: is if your politics are firmly included in your full understanding, your whole life being submitted and dedicated to Christ, then your politics can be very powerful and very helpful. If you have passed by your obedience to Christ and you're first trying to show your political strength and what you're doing in politics, then I believe that will fail and it will not be useful in the long run. You might have short-term victories, but they will turn into long-term disasters. You don't want people without God trying to peddle the things of God, because we're not peddling them. We are standing for the truth of the gospel, the person of Jesus Christ, and if we stand for him first, it will dictate who we can vote for, how we can vote, what we do, how we're involved. It will also dictate how we love our enemies, how we take care of those who are oppressed, and how we protect life. It will dictate every part of us, but it's all because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's what I was trying to say today, and I hope that that's helpful and encouraging, because some of you might be taking a path of confusion where you're like, I don't know if I should vote, I don't know if I should do this, and you're spending so much time pondering those things that you're forgetting your first love is Jesus. Pursue him. Pursue him first. If you don't have time for politics, that's okay, but you've got to make sure you have time for Christ. If you don't have time for a lot of this, that's fine. You've got to pursue Christ first. If you pursue him with all your heart, if you pursue him and you submit every part of your life to him, then I believe you will have influence on what happens in your country. Whether you're able to vote or not, you will have influence, and it will change things. And maybe, or maybe not, we can always, every election comes around, we can say, now more than ever. But I don't want to say that about political things. I want to say it is vitally important that every person in America surrenders to Jesus Christ, because whether Christ returns or whether we die and go to him, judgment is coming, and the day of his appearing is coming soon, and I want to see you at the Lamb's Supper of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And I don't really care if you vote for Trump or who you vote for. If you are not submitted to Christ, it's going to burn. It's not going to be worth anything. So, those are my thoughts. Pursue God. And in the context of you're pursuing God with all of your heart, if there's room for you to take the path of politics because of an issue that's necessary, then do it with all of your heart. But for whatever else is happening, please, please do not pursue political purposes with all of your heart and leave Christ out of the equation. Jesus first. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Till next time, blessings.
you.